In the modern NBA, it's clear that we are seeing a massive increase in overall talent spread out throughout the entire league. In the middle of what is considered by some fans to be the golden era of the NBA during the mid-80s and throughout the 90s, there was around 25 players averaging 20 or more a game, while having Michael Jordan and Karl Malone be the lone players to average 30 or more in a single season throughout the entire 1990s. Well, this season in the NBA, we have a total of 38 players averaging 20 or more a game, with Luka, Giannis, and Shea all managing to average over 30, a feat that all three of these players have been able to do before last season. Because of this massive outpouring of talent, it's led some franchises to move their hands in extreme ways by trying to assemble their own version of a super team. We have seen successful versions of this in the form of the 2010s Miami Heat, the 2024 NBA champion Boston Celtics, as well as the 2024 runner-up Dallas Mavericks in their own way. But what happens when trying to build the ultimate super team crashes and burns before even getting off the ground? Well, you get the Chicago Bulls. The franchise has been on a real roller coaster ride ever since the legendary Michael Jordan days, making a few playoff appearances since '98. But realistically, the team was never the biggest of threats. Aside from the season where Derrick Rose willed his team to the conference finals before injuries and a little pressure by Coach Tibbs completely derailed his career. After this, the franchise was kind of in a tailspin for a little bit, trying to figure out how to dig themselves out of the hole they were currently in, trying their luck with Jimmy Butler before deciding to move off of him in hopes to rebuild around Lauri Markkanen and Zach LaVine. Unfortunately, that project didn't work out, mostly due to either the misuse of Lauri or his underperforming, whichever way you want to look at it. Zach LaVine would stay with the franchise and kind of become the heart and soul of the team, which is really where the beginning of the modern Bulls super team kicked off. After dealing off Jimmy, they would go the next 4 seasons consistently missing out on the playoffs, while not having a single record above or even close to a 500 record. And by all appearances, it almost seemed as if the front office wasn't even really that worried about it, making little moves to help improve the team, and whenever they would make moves, it usually meant taking a step backwards for the team. That was until the 2020-21 season. As mentioned, at this point, the franchise were barely keeping their head above the waters, with Zach LaVine dropping many hints that he might be looking for a way out of Chicago. So the front office had finally seen the writing on the wall and for once made a somewhat of a gamble, trading off pieces they had drafted and developed for a chance at a win-now move. And that move came in the form of Nikola Vucevic. Vooch was, and still is, far from the big-name centers like Jokic, Embiid, or Sabonis. But at the time of the trade and leading up to that point, he had shown potential to transform and add to his game. A slower big man who came into the league in 2011, Vooch probably never imagined that he'd be any kind of pick-and-pop player. I mean, he went 5 years in the league before even managing to average one single three-point attempt a game. But since his rookie season, he's completely adapted to the modern game. During his last season in Orlando, Vooch was putting up 6.5 three-point attempts a game, and was knocking down 40% of those shots, making him very close to that coveted 50-40-90 club. So although he wasn't the biggest name grab, fans were still excited for the move, but none so more excited than Zach LaVine himself, who was over the moon to finally have an all-star caliber teammate. Before the trade, the team was 19-25. After the transaction, they would go 12-16 throughout the final games of the season. Obviously, not a real impressive record, but a slight upgrade, and realistically, the record doesn't show the full picture. It seemed by all appearances that Vooch was a very welcomed sight on this team, and he fit into his role very well right off the bat. And that was really all the franchise needed to hear, as after watching that small 28-game sample size, the franchise was actually ready to go all in and add to this pairing. They had their crazy athletic shooting guard in LaVine and their stretch big man in Vooch, so it was only natural they'd need a playmaker to tie this team together. And thanks to the shaky situation going on in New Orleans for quite a while, Lonzo Ball was there for pretty cheap, all things considering. And so the first move during that offseason for the Bulls came on August 8th, sending Thomas Satoransky, Garrett Temple, cash, and a 2024 second round pick to the Pelicans in exchange for Lonzo. And only 3 days after that deal, the franchise would come out with their last big move for that offseason, sending Al-Farouq Aminu, Thaddeus Young, a first and 2 second round picks to the Spurs in exchange for a pure scorer in DeMar DeRozan. The franchise would also officially cut ties with Lauri Markkanen, sending him to the Cavs, but considering what he's worth on the trade market today, it was really just for pennies on the dollar and not worth mentioning. After all these moves were finished and official, it didn't take long before fans started to clown pretty heavily on the Bulls, with many people even saying the GM must have given his phone to his kid to build this team, thinking it was a fantasy league. I think for the most part, this came in a response to seeing teams like the Nets and Clippers come together with big-name stars. But now with the benefit of hindsight, we can see both the Nets and Clippers saw absolutely zero success. And that's because those franchises saw the biggest names and brought them together, not thinking about chemistry or how they would actually look on the floor. But for the Bulls, they went out and tried to build the best, well-rounded starting lineup they could. And thanks to this, those fans that were making fun of the front office moves were quickly silenced. As heading into the new year, the team held the best record in the entire NBA at 24-10 while being in the midst of a 9-game winning streak. But unfortunately for the Bulls, this would actually be their peak. Shortly after the new year, COVID started to completely ravage this team, leading to many missed games with a 33-year-old DeMar DeRozan actually playing the most out of anyone with 76 games. But the biggest blow to this team came when Lonzo's freak injury flared up. Over his career, Lonzo Ball has received quite a bit of criticism, with some fans using the guise of saying he's failed to live up to the hype of a number 2 overall pick. But I would quickly point to James Wiseman, Marvin Bagley, and even going back to Sam Bowie in '84 being drafted between Hakeem and Michael Jordan. The number 2 spot is low-key kind of cursed, but Lonzo at least has been able to fight back against this curse, recreating and improving his jumper while also becoming one of the league's greatest playmakers, to which he's extremely overlooked. A lot of what he does on the floor doesn't show up in the stat column, but the way Lonzo was able to command the floor and help get a bucket with the hockey assist is truly underrated. So his injury was a massive blow to this team. And unlike the COVID illnesses, you could actually draw a straight line correlation between the Bulls starting to lose games and when Lonzo first sat out, proving that he was a key piece to this team, and after his injury, the franchise really hasn't been the same.
This injury was actually so devastating to the Bulls that they went from first in the East all the way down to 6th by the time the 2022 playoffs hit. It wasn't only Lonzo's injury though. A mixture of the team being extremely unlucky with COVID and minor injuries ensured that even besides Lonzo, the team could barely get a game in as a full unit. In addition to this, Alex Caruso, who was a major part of the team defensively, had to sit out a major portion of the season due to an injured wrist amongst other things. Everything seemed to go wrong at once for the Bulls during the season that at the start had shown so much promise. Once the playoffs started, as the 6th seed, the Bulls got smashed by the Milwaukee Bucks in 5 games. Unfortunately, due to the issues faced by the team, everybody saw it coming. Lonzo Ball's injury kicked off one of the greatest single-season downfalls in NBA history, and this injury wouldn't resolve itself anytime soon. As many have been following, since this injury, Lonzo Ball has not been able to play the game of basketball. He's actually sat for 2.5 seasons so far. It goes without mentioning that as the player on the team that made everything flow smoothly, this was absolutely disastrous to the Bulls and started a slow multi-year decline all the way to the bottom. In the 2 seasons following Lonzo's injury, right up until the current day, the Bulls have had consecutive mediocre seasons, placing 9th in the East each season. They didn't even make it out of the play-in tournaments both years either. The Bulls without Lonzo is one thing, but also Zach LaVine's health has seen better days with him only playing 25 games in the latest season. The The Bulls, once dreaming big of championship contention, are now scraping the bottom of the East mainly due to factors out of their control. It really sucks, but this is the dark side of trying to swing big and create a super team. Things completely beyond the team's control can derail everything, and there's not a thing the team can do about it. It's easy to look back at it in hindsight and criticize failed attempts at super teams, but nothing is guaranteed in the NBA, and you can't really blame them for trying. If anything, the Bulls were extremely smart while constructing the team. 3 of the big 4, LaVine, Lonzo, and Vooch, were all slept-on players that not many people thought were capable of being core pieces of a truly winning team. The level the Bulls played at while fully healthy with Lonzo was, as the record showed, competing with the most elite teams in the NBA. Fortunately for the Bulls, it seems they know when to cut their losses. They've seemingly committed to a soft reset of the team by trading one of the biggest stars, DeMar DeRozan, in a sign-and-trade to Sacramento. Zach LaVine has also been floating around in trade rumors for a long time at this point, so you can bet they may just ship him out too. The softer the landing from this failed project, the better. Acquiring young players or picks should soften the blow provided the assets are managed well. We could even see them in a decent spot in a few years. A better spot than, say, maybe the Nets, who after their failed super team haven't exactly managed to accomplish much. The Nets had one of the hardest crashes of a super team we've seen in a long time. The reason for this is they really didn't skimp out on trying to make their super team. No thrifty finds like the Bulls. No, they went out and got the best of the best. 3 All-Stars, Kyrie, KD, and Harden, appeared on the roster seemingly overnight, and they were all gone before 2 years together had passed, almost entirely due to ego. Or we could talk about how the LA Clippers failed badly a number of years after going all in for 2 premier two-way yet extremely injury-prone players. There are countless examples of trying to go huge in free agency failing, but for every bad example, there are good examples of this exact move that breathed life into a franchise. Teams like the modern Dallas Mavericks and especially the modern Boston Celtics are amazing examples of teams that had their attempted super team building trades actually work out for them. What do you think about swinging big in free agency? Do you think teams should be trying harder in free agency, or should they be more conservative and focus on in-team development? If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, leave a comment, or subscribe. We really appreciate everything, and we'll see you next video.